Hello, people. This time we're going to see how the Americas started to change with the arrival of the first European explorers. And this was a hard change, I have to say, because it was not a fairy tale. It took a lot of lives and major changes for Americans to try to adapt to what Europeans wanted at that time. Okay? Let's take a look at that with me. This is a map of the colonization of the Americas. These are the territories that were taken by the Europeans at that time. The green part is the major part that was taken by the Spanish. Okay, as you can see, our country is right here. It was taken by Spaniards. And as Ecuador, Chile, Argentina, all that part, Central America, Mexico, you see? Aha. The flesh part, this light orange part, is Portuguese territory, which is basically Brazil. You see? The blue part was taken by the French, and it takes part of the United States and part of Canada. In fact, there are places in Canada in which people speak French. And also, there are parts in the southeast of the United States that were French colonies. And the influence of the French is still very evident in their way of life. You see? The brown part is the Russian territory. Why? Because if you take a look around the globe, you will see that the northeast part of Russia is very close to this part of America. So they had access to it, you see? They could reach it, and they claimed for those lands. And the Dutch territory is this purple one that is really tiny here. But not only that part, also islands of the Caribbean, like Curacao, Aruba, Bonaire, that were also part of the Dutch Empire. Okay? After the arrival of the first European explorers, they continued learning about the wonders of the two continents. It was young, it was full of resources, and they needed to take advantage of it. Ferdinand Magellan, who was a Portuguese explorer, discovered Cape Horn at the tip of South America, here where Chile is. You see here, right here. And he was the first to make a circumnavigation of the globe. Imagine give a whole spin to the globe. I mean, by taking different passages. From that moment, it was more than proven that the earth was rounded. Okay. After defeating the Aztecs, the Spaniards explored the southwest of the United States looking for gold. The Aztecs were the richest civilization at that time, but they had to acknowledge that they didn't have the same level of powers the Europeans had, so they had to surrender at the end. And they took this part of the United States that correspond to Nevada, California, New Mexico, Texas, So, because they knew gold was there and it was very valuable. The English looked for the Northwest Passage. This passage, okay? They had already taken this part of the Northeast and this part that was close to the Southeast, okay? But they needed to take the other part, and it was not easy because they didn't know how to reach it, And the French explored the rivers of North America here, okay? They were fascinated by that environment. And as I said before, some parts of the United States were French colonies for a while. Okay, let's continue. These are the early explorers. The first one, of course, was Christopher Columbus. He was here in 1492 on October 12th. That is a holiday. Okay, and he was making explorations till 1504. He reached the Caribbean islands, but in the third trip to America, he reached Venezuela. Okay? Vasco Núñez de Balboa arrived to America in 1513, and he reached Central America. Hernán Cortés arrived to Mexico in 1519, and he finished his exploration in 1521. Giovanni da Verrazzano, who was Italian, of course, searched for the Northwest Passage in 1524. Francisco Pizarro came here in 1531. And he arrived to Peru, and he was making a series of explorations to the ancient Inca culture and Cusco, and discovered the riches they had to offer. But he finished his explorations in 1535. Jacques Cartier, he was from France. He was the first to explore Canada and St. Lawrence River in 1535. Hernando de Soto was another important explorer. He arrived to America in 1539, specifically in the North American Southeast. And he finished his explorations in 1542. Estebanico was a Muslim. Okay, this is not his real name. This was a nickname he had, you know? He arrived here in 1539. But just to get to know the continent. I mean, his intention was not to take over anything or to conquer anything. He just wanted to check out what the continent was like, you know? Francisco Vázquez de Coronado arrived to America in 1540, and he finished his exploration in 1542. He reached the North American Southwest. He was one of the ones who wanted to get the gold, you know, from the Southwest. Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, California, Nevada. And at last, we have Martin Frobisher, okay, who searched for the Northwest Passage. Okay. Once the Europeans came, they started to establish colonies, and they felt that they could do it because they had the power in terms of people and weapons and resources that the Native Americans didn't have. But not for that reason, the Native Americans didn't defend themselves. Many died, that's for sure, but not without fighting. They did not give in that easy, you know? First, the French established their power in today's Canada. Then, the English ruled the 13 colonies that would become the United States and some Caribbean islands. But we're talking here about America. Remember that the English took over other places in Europe, in Asia, in Africa, and even in Australia. Okay? That is just America. Okay? Just so you know. The French and Dutch also set up colonies in the Caribbean, the islands, you know? That is why in some islands, different languages are spoken, such as those languages, okay? The Russians started trading outposts in Alaska and Northern California. It was not about conquering, per se. They just wanted to trade. They just wanted to get resources and offer what they had. But they didn't have much, so it wasn't successful at the end, you know? The Spanish and the Portuguese colonized the largest area, from South Florida, you know, South Florida, the tip of the country, to the east, to the tip of South America, where Chile is, and Argentina. The top official in the Spanish colonies was not the king. Not in his presence, but he sent an assistant that was called the viceroy, which was the representative of the king in these new colonies in America. And the top official in Portuguese colonies was called governor or general. It was not viceroy, it was governor. It was different, okay? This is a representation of the arrival of Columbus and the arrival of Hernán Cortés to Mexico. These pictures over here. Okay. This is the structure of the Colonial Society. It is, as usual, a pyramid, okay, that has a structure from the top to the bottom. And at the top, there were the peninsulares, the Spaniards that were born in Spain, the ones that came up here and settled here. The Creoles, born in New Spain meaning America, or that had Spanish parents, okay? The mestizos that they were born from Spanish and Native American Indian parents. This was a scandal at that moment. I mean, mixing people from Europe with people from America, I mean, that was not supposed to happen, but come on, that is something that cannot be in control. The Native American Indians, okay, who was nearly at the bottom, they were very mistreated at that moment. They were, I mean, taken away from taken out of the way, you know? And the slave persons that were brought from Africa and the Caribbean. They were treated like property. And that is what slavery basically is, you know? A very dark chapter in history, I must say. In this part, we're going to talk about a woman's place in society. As you know, women didn't have many rights at that moment. Okay? Men had access to education, commerce, religion, government. They had voice in all those aspects of life. And women, on the other hand, or instead, had only two choices, or getting married or become a nun in a convent and devote her life to God for good. Imagine that. Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, who is the girl that is sitting over here writing, was a criolla. She was born from Spanish parents. She was a poet, but she entered a convent at 17 because she decided that she needed to get away from the idea of marriage. She thought, if I get married, I'm not going to find my own voice. My husband is going to subdue me, so I'm not going to let that happen. So she preferred to become a nun. But from becoming a nun, other things came, like questioning in her poems, the rigid roles of men and women. I mean, that was a scandal as well at that time, you know? Jesus Christ, a woman questioning men's decisions? No, that was not supposed to happen. She spoke out in favor of scientific experimentation as a way to understand the world. I mean, she never thought that, in spite of being a nun, she never questioned the fact that scientific discoveries were a matter of witchcraft or things like that. No, she totally understood what science was about, and she supported it till death. That was very remarkable at that time. That is why she's now so important in the history. African and Native American slaves. As I said before, this is a very dark chapter in our history. Why? Because by the 1600s, Native American population dropped a lot. Why? There were 50 million Native Americans here, but at the end of all the process of exploration and conquest of European explorers and colonists, only 4 million remained. They died of overwork because they were forced to do things against their will, and that is a form of slavery. And they were mistreated. And Europeans brought diseases here that they were not immune against. So eventually they died. The first enslaved Africans were brought to Spanish America 13 years after Columbus' arrival. That means 1507, sort of? Yes, 1507. The first slaves from Africa started to arrive to America at that moment. They came in chains, you know, so tight that their skin was broken and bleeding. And not also the wrist, but their ankles, you know, and they were chained in a row. It was so horrible. The mistreatment was so horrible. They were treated like worse than animals. I would dare to say, you know, it was terrible. Native Americans were treated by the Spanish different from Africans because they were not treated as products. They were not bought for money, but they were forced to work. I mean, they were not even products and they were not property, but it was sort of the same mistreatment, you know? And in the land holdings called encomiendas, the landholder owned the land and the Native Americans that were working there. But that stopped later with that disadvantage because there was a new system called peonage in which the landowner or the landholder now had to pay each worker a wage. But at the end, they started to give the worker things, and those things that were given to the worker became a debt. So the worker was forced to stay there to pay that debt. So it was not profit at the end. It was another form of slavery, we have to say. Let's continue. The missionaries. The missionaries came here to try to bring some balance to the harsh situation the Native Americans and the slaves were going through. And why? Because Spain and Portugal's first goal was to tap the wealth of the Americas. That was at first, but the second was to convert the Native Americans to Roman Catholicism. They despised the idea of Native American and Africans worshiping multiple gods and goddesses and adoring the sun, the moon. I mean, those are things from outer space. They are not gods or goddesses in their own criteria. The first Spanish missionaries reached Mexico in 1524. They preached religion, they healed the sick because they had certain knowledge in medicine, and they set up schools. They became teachers. They became basically teachers. That is why many people at that time started to learn to speak Spanish. They fought to improve conditions for Native Americans. I mean, they saw the lack of humanity that was the first impression in those settlements. So they tried to make a change. They tried to make a difference. In the 1500s, Bartolomé de las Casas, who was a missionary, he was a priest, and other priests protested the mistreatment of Native Americans. At the beginning, he had the idea of trying to ease the overwork of the Native Americans by using more the African slaves. But eventually he regretted that because he realized that Africans were also human beings. They didn't have to be treated as machines that could do any work at any hour. I mean, they were having the same rough situation the Indians were going through. So at the end, he had to take that back. And within a short time, many Native Americans became Catholics. I mean, the goal was reached. Eventually, in time, other religions came up. But if you take a look at our culture as Latin Americans, the first religion is Catholicism. We are baptized and we go to church every Sunday. You know, it's basically that way. And that was taken from the Spanish. Okay? But don't think that that was it, because the Native Americans continued worshiping other goddesses and other gods. I mean, not in presence of the missionaries, but within themselves, you know? Cultural mix. This was one of the good things that this conquest of Spain brought with it. First of all, the food. I mean, the new combination of American food with European food was something amazing, because peninsulares and criollos made a flat corn and flour bread called tortilla, and from the tortilla you can get many dishes, especially in Mexico. Quesadillas, tacos, tostadas, burritos. I mean, it's something amazing. Later on, in other places in America, other ways of preparing the corn were developed, as it happened here with the arepa. It's not a tortilla, but it's a cornbread, that is rounded and it can be filled with anything you want. Amazing. Okay. They adapted the hammocks, the Mayan style hammocks, to their way of life because they found out, oh my God, this is so comfy, and it was perfect to take a nap or to sleep. It was amazing. This is the Virgin of Guadalupe. This was a vision of the Virgin Mary that appeared to a baptized by a missionary, Aztec named Juan Diego. Juan Diego was the first who saw her. Okay, but the skin of Virgin Mary was not white, it was tanned. So that is why many Mexicans call her La Virgen Morena, the tanned virgin, or the brown skin virgin. And she is a symbol of the faith of many Americans, not just Mexicans. For Mexicans, imagine, she's the first, the one and only, but also for many people in other parts in America, The African foods are also very delicious and were brought here, and the farmers discovered that they could be grown here without any problem because the climate was tropical. They grew yams, black-eyed peas, bananas. Imagine bananas. Bananas can be grown here in America the entire year. We had bananas 12 months a year. It's a privilege. And of course, the instruments, percussion, and why not? Some melodic instruments were brought from Africa, okay? And they defined the rhythm and the beat of what Latin American music is today. Look, this is a kalimba, these are the shakers, this is a balafon, a marimba, which is based on the xylophone. These are drums, this is called djembe. They sound amazing for many styles of music. You see? But not everything was really nice because the piracy started and the piracy was harsh at that time. In the late 1500s, the English sea dogs, because the name for pirates was that also. It was pirates, but was also sea dogs, like Sir Francis Drake, that is an English explorer, but, in search for money, harassed the Spaniards. The Spaniards wanted to take their riches to Spain, and these pirates always took the riches from them. So they attacked the Spanish ships down in the Caribbean, the Spanish Main. They didn't make truce with the Spaniards in any way. They were the thieves. They were the criminals at that time. It was amazing. England started sugar plantations in Jamaica. That is why in Jamaica, people speak English, okay? And France had a colony in what is today Haiti. In Haiti, people speak French. Remember that Haiti shares territory with Dominican Republic, which was Hispaniola at that time. In Dominican Republic, people speak Spanish, and in Haiti, people speak French. 4 separate wars in the late 1600s and 1700s helped to redraw the colonial borders between the American territories of the European nations. Okay? And those wars were especially for money. Spaniards knew that there were other territories, or there were certain territories that were more wealthier than others. So it took several wars to define who gets what, It's always a matter of ambition and power. And remember that money leads to power. That's the cruel truth, okay? This part is about the fall of the empires, of the Native American empires, the American civilizations of that time. First, the Aztecs. The Aztecs fell because in 1915, or in 1519, 1519, Hernán Cortés and his conquistadors arrived to the east coast of Mexico. He knew that it was not going to be easy. He knew that to get control of the territory, he had to defeat Moctezuma, who was the Aztec emperor. But it was not going to be as difficult as he thought because he became nervous. Because he believed in the prophecy that stated that Quetzalcoatl will return to claim his land as a light-skinned creature. Remember that dragon from the Aztecs? Well, that creature. But also, he saw him as the figure of a human with white beard and white skin. So he thought maybe this is Quetzalcoatl. No? Cortes met a Native American named Malinche. She was an Aztec. And she was his interpreter. She told him her people resented the treatment of Aztec leaders. And she thought that Cortes was going to defend the Aztecs from Moctezuma and his crew. But she was mistaken because the only intention of Hernan Cortes was to take over the riches of the Aztecs. And that's what he did at the end. Cortes' men set fire to Tenochtitlan. Imagine the face of Malinche when she saw that. My God, I thought you were going to defend us, and you are destroying our city. Its stones were turned into churches and palaces for the new Spanish capital. You see? Tenochtitlan was renamed Mexico. You see? The first Mexico was Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Mexicas, another name for the Aztecs. Okay, that is why nowadays, when people talk about Mexicans, they talk about the Aztec people, the Aztec team, or things like that. It became the capital of New Spain at that moment. Today, it's not Mexico. It's not entirely Mexico. It is just Mexico City, the capital of the nation that is really large, very large, and has the particularity of being the most populated capital city in the world with nearly 30 million people. I mean, that can't be the population of our entire country. That is only the capital of Mexico. Imagine that. And last, the Incas. The Incas also lost their territory. Why? Because Francisco Pizarro reached Peru and met Atahualpa, that was the son of the former Inca ruler, who has defeated his brother in the way for the throne. But when that happened, the empire remained weak. I mean, he as a leader was not as powerful as his father. And it's going to take for him a lot of time to become as powerful as he was. Because when you are a leader, you have to prove that you are capable of ruling your people. Atahualpa took lightly the threat posed by the Spaniards. I mean, they came here and he didn't pay much attention. And when Pizarro invited him to a feast is like a banquet, you know? It's like a buffet with food and entertainment, you know? In 1532, he took him as a prisoner and executing him the next year. Atahualpa never came back to Cusco. He remained as a prisoner for a year until his death. Pizarro soon captured the capital city of Cusco. But Cusco couldn't be a new capital as he wanted. He wanted to construct a new capital there. But remember that Cusco is located in a mountain. It was specifically in the Andes Mountains, so it was difficult to reach that part of the country. So in 1535, Pizarro founded a new city near the Pacific coast. He called it the City of the Kings. It was later called Lima, and this city became the headquarters for Spanish viceroys. And Lima now is the capital of Peru. You see? It couldn't be Cusco. Okay, people, that's it for today. In the next chapter, in the next part of the changing culture of the Americas, we'll see some other aspects of this process of conquest and later independence of America. Thank you. Thank you for your attention. Bye.